Hey and welcome. I'm Hammeh, and a bit of Overwatch news for you and your thoughts today. Bastion is going to be getting buffed. On the forums the other day, Jeff Goodman, the game's lead designer, discussed some potential changes and buffs to Bastion that might be coming to the PTR soon and that Blizzard are experimenting with. I'll quickly round them up for you, have a bit more of a broad thought as to what they could mean for both Bastion lovers and Overwatch gamers, for us players in general, and if you play at mid to lower rank competitive like me, how to prepare a little bit for what might be or might not be a coming storm. Firstly, let's have a little summary of where Bastion is at right now. Why is he being changed? Is a buff necessary? I know for some players this might feel a bit strange or a bit of a surprise, but Overwatch is getting close to a year old. People know more about the heroes, and Bastion, with his more challenging, let's say, dueling ability when in Recon Mode and vulnerability in all of his modes, has fallen behind the curve a little bit. In pro play, if you have a look at recent tournaments, he's been absolutely nowhere, and in honesty, he's not been picked in the recent tank meta. Occasionally, some people have grabbed him as a surprise strap pick in some cases. Really, in pro or high level play, he hasn't been hugely relevant in a mainstream way pretty much since Overwatch released. He did see some picks from Korean teams in King of the Hill maps for a while in late 2016. These images are from Captain Planet, by the way. Check his meta reports out over on Overbuff for a great insight of the pro shifts of gameplay and picks. Link will be in the description below. In competitive ladder, it kind of depends on your level, I guess. There are a few high Bastion mains who've done very well solo queuing, but anecdotally, Bastion still shows up more as a regular pick around the lower to mid competitive ranks, where it's either super effective or not very effective. Pretty much nothing in between. At least that's what I found around Platinum, High Plat, and when I've been in Gold anyway. Do share your experiences in the comments. If at lower to mid levels, or if in a quick play scenario where people aren't dealing with him, you might feel that Bastion is horrible and doesn't need this, but what I would say is step back and consider this. At the moment, Bastion probably needs a bit more to work with than other, more mainstream, some might argue more reliable or solo picks. Bastion is always a clue check for both teams whenever it's picked in a match. It requires team understanding and some support of its playstyle to be most effective if it's on your team, and for the team playing against a Bastion, it's again a sort of clue check whether they team up to counter whatever way the Bastion is being run, do they work as a team to get rid of it. However, there are other heroes on defense and indeed just doing general damage who can work a lot more simply and a lot more individually. Pick a Soldier 76, for example, on defense. No one's going to question your bullet high DPS. They know what you're going to do. They know that you're going to have a job. But Bastion has this different feeling to him. He doesn't run so solo. He needs a bit more setup or a bit more understanding. Okay, now let's go over the proposed changes that Jeff Goodman mentioned one by one, and I'll go through my thoughts for each. Firstly, Recon Mode. There's going to be a potentially lowered spread and increased magazine size to help with what is, quote, general viability in this mode. Now, if this goes through, I find the phrase general viability pretty interesting, and it's almost saying that Bastion in Recon Mode is a bit of a pain to play. At the moment, he is a walking target when not transformed. Now, that's not because of his weapon. It's not bad, but the spread is a little large. If you don't land the shots, if you're not used to the way it fires, or you're at a certain distance, you're toast. It doesn't feel to me like the other bullet firing weapons in many different ways. This means that very often if you're a Bastion player, when you're in Recon Mode, it's more of a movement phase and occasionally a desperation phase as well. Get out of trouble. Do you just shoot and die, or do you try and go into Recon? And if you're dueling someone in a one-on-one with Recon, that's where the really good Bastions shine. The people who have mastered this spread, and they make it work for them, playing him to suit. And when you watch their VODs, those are the people who are generally better in Recon and dueling, but it's still tough for a Bastion to do. Lower spread will mean that Bastion should feel a little bit better when it comes to trying to pick out targets when you're running around in Recon, and of course an increased magazine size. Those small amount of bullets that Bastion has tend to disappear if you're not accurate, so that's definitely going to increase his kill potential and keep him a bit safer, but I'll talk a bit more about that later. The next proposed changes are to Sentry Mode. Blizzard are looking at focusing this mode into more of a tank buster and barrier buster mode. We'll come to that, hold that thought, while making it also feel less suicidal to be transformed. Stuff like increased spread and removing headshots is being tested, but Bastion may take less damage when he's transformed. When a Bastion player is in Sentry, he or she, let's face it, is powerful and vulnerable. That's kind of the design of the hero, right? Vulnerable to the point that people have to, as I've said before, set up and buy into their playstyle, or the enemy team have to lack enough teamwork, for want of a better description, or communication, so that the Bastion player can do the sort of hit and run thing, the surprise Bastion thing without interruption. Reducing Bastion's damage here, with no headshots actually, and an increased spread, it's going to be harder in Sentry Mode to hose, in theory, fast-moving smaller targets. Now, how much harder, of course, we're only going to see when we actually see those changes in action, but things flanking around Tracers, moving Genjis, in theory that's going to be a little bit tougher for a Bastion to lock onto, and the no headshots applies across the board. That is a flat damage decrease, really, for Bastion in Sentry Mode if you're being reasonably accurate and aiming vaguely in the region of their head. Of course, Bastian is still pumping out damage very, very quickly, so if you're close to him, still expect to get shredded. It's going to hurt maybe less if the Bastian is accurate or the target is unshielded, but it's still going to hurt. These changes in damage do, as Blizzard have said, as Goodman has said, make it more of an anti-tank or anti-barrier thing. Anything with barriers, large targets, poor Winston, I think he's going to suffer. He needs a little bit of a look soon. At the moment, people complained or recently about the tank meta. Now, this has been a pro level thing. I don't know how much you've seen it in competitive. I'm not even sure if it's a thing hugely in quick play. This was 3 or 4 tanks being run with an Ana, or perhaps 3 tanks with a Soldier 76 and a couple of supports. This did bleed a bit into the competitive ladder. We've seen Ana's grenade get tweaked, which was something that was kind of responsible for this at pro levels because it meant that you could keep these tanks up quickly. We've seen a bit of a tune to D.Va to make sure that she's not quite as beefy as she was, but she's still able to do some flanking ability. But the piece that remains always has been Reinhardt Shield. There is, at some levels of play, if you've got Reinhardt versus Reinhardt and 2 teams plugging away at each other, who kills the shield first? When the shield goes down, that leaves one team open to try and pick off a couple of the other team. If they get that pick, then the team fight can snowball. You get the advantage, and then you get more ahead. Bastian has crazy damage per second right now, and in theory, he's awesome for this. And on defense, you've probably seen Bastian shredding that Reinhardt shield very quickly if a Reinhardt just walks around a corner on attack into a Bastian. This might allow Bastian maybe some use to do this on attack as well. Potentially not all the time or as a pick for a whole game, but it'd be interesting to see. Along with his increased maneuverability, it feels as though maybe people will try using Bastian on attack a bit more for this shield busting capability, but he's still going to need support to do so. Finally, the point about increased durability or survivability. In Overwatch, basically, what are your mechanics to tweak this if you're Blizzard? You have armor, health, or shield as the mechanics for less damage when transformed, unless there's a physical barrier in the way somehow between the damage and you. So what's going to be interesting is how Blizzard tie that to transformed into Sentry. They've mentioned that they want Bastian to take less damage while transformed. Now, there's actually already a mechanic that was in the game way back before closed beta even. You may have seen it in some very early trailers for Overwatch. Bastian had a shield. I know a lot of people maybe don't even remember this. So it'll be interesting to see if Blizzard use armor, for example. Maybe they bring this little Bastian shield back. It did have its issues back in the day. But so I do wonder if that will reappear, maybe a smaller protective arc or less HP. Finally, Blizzard have talked about some changes to Bastion's self-repair. There have been some big changes, and from the wording of this, it sounds as though that Goodman and Blizzard are most confident about these, so I would kind of expect these to come into PTR. The others, it sounds as though they're still experimenting with from the more cautious language. So, the Blizzard internal build has Bastion able to use self-repair while moving, and also have it no longer interrupted while taking damage, which again is pretty significant. To balance that out, it's now on a resource system. Think of D.Va's defense matrix is the example that's been quoted, where you use it and then it recharges. These changes have turned this ability from a more niche, rarely used ability to a much more powerful and core survivability tool. Now, of course, Bastion's self-repair was one of those weird abilities to me. It's another thing that makes him vulnerable. He's vulnerable at the moment when he's in Recon Mode as a duelist if he has to 1v1. He's vulnerable in Sentry Mode. He's also vulnerable when self-repairing. So when you think about Bastion's vulnerabilities and him having to stand still to self-repair, this should let Bastion players be more mobile in terms of hiding and not having to potentially even use health packs. Think of Bastion self-repair. In reality, you'd have to get yourself generally out of the way enough someone doesn't come and hunt you down to be able to safely self-repair. The actual time delay of doing that as a Bastion slows down the amount a Bastion right now can participate in the fight, their sort of frontline uptime, if that makes sense. Of course, that also increases the amount of time that the opponents know where a Bastion is. It gives the opponents more time to communicate where a Bastion is. By the time this has all happened, you almost feel more vulnerable as a Bastion, or I do when I play. Why not just take a health pack and get back to the fight more quickly rather than have to run really far away, repair myself, come all the way back, and by that time the opponent's probably moved the payload on if it's a payload map, or they've telegraphed or communicated where I am. This does sound powerful, but do consider defense matrix. If it's on a resource system, this repair, and Bastion can move, then sure, it is powerful, but the interesting thing will be how much it heals and repairs for, and how quickly it recharges, so I wouldn't scream about this one just yet. For D.Va, spamming defense matrix isn't always the best idea. You do need to time it. Although you want to always be at a good high level of health, Bastion being able to use this while moving, I feel will actually keep him on the front line more, rather than make him any kind of crazy invincible, but of course it depends on those recharge rates. Keeping Bastion more in Recon Mode as well is going to be another side effect of this, so it gives a Bastion more opportunity to perhaps deal with flankers, dance around the sideline on defense before setting up, and if they do need to move from Sentry Mode, perhaps relocate to a better position a little bit more safely than a Bastion could before, which is all going to help his general playstyle. So, as a quick summary, what could this mean for us playing day-to-day Overwatch? Well, if these changes go through, I think Bastion's going to feel better on the move. His recon is definitely getting some strength, both with the self-heal and the smaller clustering of his bullets, along with a larger magazine size. He'll be able to duel a little bit more. He'll be more survivable, more of a threat in recon, able to scare off people in duels more, perhaps if not, kill them outright. Good Bastions right now, with Recon Mode, can be very, very effective with Bastion's recon weapon. He's certainly going to be a bit more focused on tank busting in his Sentry mode, but again it's going to be the changes of the spread and how much survivability he gets. Giving him more survivability in Sentry mode means that Bastion is being encouraged in Sentry to be in Sentry perhaps without protection a little bit more, or if he is in Sentry with protection of a Reinhardt for example, then to stay there for a little bit longer. He doesn't have to be quite so trigger happy. It's not stay or die, and I think that's what Blizzard mean. It doesn't always feel suicidal to set up as a Bastion, but it does feel as though once you're there and once you're in a nest especially, or if you're on your own, there's not much of a way out, and what Blizzard are giving with these survivability changes is perhaps more of a way out. Actually, all of these changes, I think, in the whole, might mean less nested Bastions, something that generally annoys people at lower levels or people at any level when a team isn't teaming up to deal with it, to be honest. Okay, so finally a little thought. If these changes do go to the PTR, if they do make it to live in these current states, and of course a lot can change in that time, I still think we're going to see a lot more Bastions picked for a while in quick play and in competitive. So here are some quick thoughts. If you see this, if you're not the Bastion yourself, support your Bastion in the right way. It's generally always better to work with a pick if a teammate really isn't going to switch, then having a go at them all game for doing so, that just makes things harder for you to win. Bastion, I think, might be able to do a job. I mean, he can do a job right now, but he might be able to do more of a job with these changes if you support him. If you're seeing a Bastion in a situation that's still perceived as a bit of an odd pick, attacking perhaps, give them a chance. Perhaps they're one of these amazing Bastions who can make it work. For those of you who still have Bastion PTSD, hey, if Bastion sets up near you, there are plenty of counters, all of the usual, and perhaps for an off-the-beaten-track pick, let me introduce you to Satya Vaswani. She's an architect, by the way, of the Vishkar Corporation, and she has this thing called a photon projector. It launches giant orbs that penetrate shields, and because they move slowly, targets that sit still, especially groups of people, are lovely targets for them. I, for one, welcome Symmetra as our new overlady. What do you think of the proposed Bastion changes? Are you struggling with Bastion at your ranking competitive if you play? Do you think these will make Bastion come into play more? I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments, and if you are on PC and can get onto the public test realm when these go live, get on there, download it, it's free, give it a go, and help Blizzard and help everyone make these changes good. Thanks for tuning in. For all my Overwatch lore videos, game news, interactions and voice lines, do check the playlists below. I've been Hammeh, catch you soon, take it easy.